Hi, I'm Pat Keegan and welcome to the shop. In this video segment, I'm going to show you how to construct each of the plywood boxes that gets mounted behind this longer face frame. Once assembled and complete, this entire cabinet will be mounted as one unit above the sink in our kitchen project. And if you haven't seen it already, I highly recommend that you go back and watch the short kitchen overview video that I posted earlier. In this very short video, I show you exactly where all the kitchen cabinet components are going to be mounted in the kitchen using a 3D model that I've rendered with Google SketchUp. I think it's critically important for any construction project to keep the big picture in mind always during the entire construction process. As with all the cabinets that we've created so far, I'll be using the exact same techniques that you've seen in the previous videos. I'll make sure that all my plywood is cut to the proper dimension. I'll make sure that all of the shelf pin holes are drilled in the cabinet sides before assembly, and then I'll follow that up with making sure that all of the pocket holes are drilled in all of the right places in order for me to assemble the cabinet components together as well as anchor this face frame to the front of the cabinet. Before I cut any of the pieces of plywood I need to its final dimension, I'd just like to point out a couple things. Each plywood box that I'm going to build requires 5 pieces, a top, a bottom, 2 sides, and a back. So I'll be cutting 15 pieces in total. As I've mentioned in a previous video, I always get the plywood that I buy cut to rough dimension at the shop where I buy them. They're willing to do this for a very small fee, and in some places where I can get plywood they will do it for no fee at all, but it's definitely worth it. I do this for 2 reasons. The first is I don't like to have to handle 4x8 sheets of plywood in a very small shop space that I have here. It's very unwieldy. The second reason I do this is because my table saw is not set up to safely handle cutting 4x8 sheets of plywood. So I have the store where I buy them rip them to rough width. For building kitchen cabinets, I'll have them rip a single sheet of 4x8 plywood into 3 pieces, a 24-inch wide piece and then 2 12-inch wide pieces that run the whole entire 8-foot length. I do this in kitchen cabinets particularly because the depth of each base cabinet is 23 1/4 inches, which I'll get out of the 24-inch piece, and each of the upper cabinets requires a plywood box that's 11 1/4 inches deep, which I'll get out of the 12s. Then all that's left for me to do is to cut each of the cabinet pieces to the right length, and then I can trim them up on the table saw very safely. That being said, let's get this out of the way, and I'll cut the pieces for the sides first. Okay, we're ready to cut some plywood, but before I make my first cut, I wanted to point out a few things that I use during the setup that I have. I want to make sure that I minimize the number of cuts that I actually have to make with the circular saw. It's just not that efficient to have to cut one piece at a time with this setup. So I want to make sure I can cut as many pieces as I can. So to that end, I've made sure that I've stacked 2 pieces of the 12-inch wide plywood on top of each other here and another 2 pieces here. And I've simply butted them together along the long edge. I've clamped them in place to hold them from moving because this has a slick surface which tends to move if you stack them on top of each other. And I've already gone ahead and measured the 42 inches that I need, and I've installed and applied the cutting jig that I use. In this way, with one cut, I've got 4 of the 6 sides already done. Then I'll take this piece away and I'll probably cut the end panel as well with the cherry plywood that I'm going to use. So 2 cuts and I've got all 6 of my sides cut to length. Now you could probably do a little bit more, but this is what I feel is safe for me here in the shop, given that these are a little bit slippery and given the setup that I have. So once that's done, I'll go and I'll cut all the pieces that I need to the right length, and then I'll trim them to the right width using the table saw that I got, where it's a little bit more safer and it's definitely faster. So I won't show you all the boring details of all the cuts, just know that I use the circular saw to optimize the length cuts that I make, and then I trim them to the width that I need using the table saw. Okay, I've cut all the plywood that I need now to the right height using my circular saw and the setup of the jig that you see behind me as we discussed previously. Now what I need to do is take each of these pieces for the sides the tops and bottoms for each of the cabinets in the back, and I need to rip them to the right width. If you remember, for the cabinet sides, the plywood box pieces need to be 11 1/4 inches wide. The tops and the bottoms need to be 10 1/4 inches wide. This is because I take a 3/4 inch piece of plywood from the back and I set it 1/4 of an inch in from the back edge. So what that means is that I'm an inch in shorter than the width of the overall cabinet. That might sound confusing, but again, you'll see it when we put it together. So I've got to rip those pieces to 10 1/4. The backs will be ripped to the proper width that they need to be for the cabinet. One is 30 1/2 inches and one's 30 3/4 because of the way I made the face frame. So I'll get those all cut together on the table saw rather, and then we'll go ahead and we'll start drilling for some shelf pin holes. Now I've got all the plywood that I need cut to the final dimension. I've got the 3 pieces that I'm going to use for the back, I've got the 6 tops and bottoms, and I've got the 6 sides. The next step in the process is to drill all the shelf pin holes in each of the cabinet sides. If you remember from the last video, I always clamp it, I mark the bottom and the front edge so that I can remember where I need to start the jig, and I always start it at the bottom so that the holes are level across when the pieces are facing each other. Now I've got a heck of a lot of shelf pin holes to drill, so I've already got my shelf pin drilling guide clamped to the workpiece. I've got it flushed with the bottom. I'm going to start 10 3/4 inch up, and I'm going to do both sides on each of the pieces that I have that will be facing each other for the shelves. Here we go. Okay, 204 shelf pin holes later, I think I'm ready to start drilling for some pocket holes. I'm going to drill them identically to what we did in the previous video for the cabinet that goes above the stove. Okay, with all of the pocket holes finally drilled in all of my pieces, all the tops, the bottoms, all the sides, and all of the backs, I'm ready to start some assembly. As you can see here, I'm going to assemble these boxes the same way I assembled the boxes in the previous video. I've got one of the side pieces clamped to the table. Again, I'm using my 1 1/4 inch spacer block so that I make sure that the bottom shelf is exactly how far away I want it from the bottom edge of the cabinet, which in this case is 1 1/4 inch because I've got 2-inch face frames. I'm also going to make sure that the front edge of this bottom piece is flush to the front edge of the side piece. And I know it's the front because of the way the shelf pin holes that I drilled are facing. So then I'm going to take the pocket hole clamp, I'm going to put it in one of the pocket holes, make sure it's flush, and clamp it into place. And then I'm going to take pocket screw and put one in the back and then one towards the front. Now that the bottom is attached to one of the sides, I attach the top. And all I do is make sure that the top is about 1/2 inch down from this top edge. The top shelf is down from the top edge. Now with the top and the bottom attached, I'll flip this over and attach the top and the bottom to the other side. Okay, with the top and the bottoms now successfully attached to both sides, I need to install the back. So I'm going to flip the cabinet on its front, and as you can see, there's about an inch recess here from the back side of the cabinet wall to the back side of the shelf. We did that deliberately when we cut our widths so that the back of the box would rest on these two pieces while we screwed everything in. The only problem is with a larger box like this one, as opposed to the cabinets we created over the stove, the back pieces are a little bit large and a little bit heavy. So what can happen with larger cabinets, if you're using a 3/4 inch or a 1/2 inch back, you can get some sag in the back when it's resting against the top and the bottom shelves. So I don't want any of that sag because that's going to impact the performance of being able to move the shelves up and down. So I built this little tiny jig that's basically the same depth, it's the same depth and height as the tops and bottoms of the cabinet. So when I place this in there, it's going to prop up the center of this larger board to avoid any sag. So let me put this in here and then I'll be able to screw everything in place. I'm going to snug up the tops and make sure that it's flush. Actually, this is the bottom, so I'll flush that up nice and even, and I'm going to check for square. If you remember in the other video, we checked for square by checking the diagonal of the cabinet. If the diagonals are equal, then we know our cabinet is exactly square. If one of the diagonals is longer than the other one, then we know we need to apply some clamping pressure to that longer diagonal in order to bring the box into square. So we've got 52 7/8. And 52 7/8. That's pretty lucky. That usually doesn't happen. So I'll start by just putting some pocket screws along the edges where we've drilled the pocket holes. Now that I've anchored one side with the pocket screws all the way down, I still have movement in the box, so I want to check for square one more time just to be absolutely sure. And I got 52 7/8 and 52 7/8. So now I'll go ahead and I'll fasten the other side, and one box will be almost complete. Now that the back is anchored to both sides, I want to finish this cabinet box by making sure that I anchor the top and the bottom to the back through these pocket holes that I drilled up here. Alright, one cabinet box is complete. This is going to be the one that's mounted on the right. All I have to do is assemble the center and the left end box exactly the same way, and I'll be done creating all three cabinet boxes. Well, that pretty much does it. I've got all three of my cabinet boxes now assembled the way I showed you the way the first one was done. So, as I said in the previous video, the way I do these cabinets is I'm building one long cabinet. It's going to be very heavy, and I'm going to have a friend or two help me to get this in place. But I think it's worth it because I can build it all at once at the shop. I don't have to monkey around with multiple boxes when I'm actually doing the install, and I just need a person or two to help me lift this. One person should be fine if you've got a 2x4 cleated against the wall where you're going to install it. Now, the way I'm going to assemble this cabinet is the same way we did the cabinets over the stove. I'm going to put this one down, which is the center one, down on the face frame, face down, and I'm going to use these pocket screws, pocket holes and pocket screws that we drilled into the side in order to attach that to the face frame. Then I'm going to come in and put the two other boxes on either side of the center box, making sure that they're in the right location. And I'm going to push them up against one another, but as you saw in the previous video with the stove cabinet, I'm not going to be able to get at these pocket holes that are on this side of the box, which I said you didn't have to drill, but I drilled anyway just in case I decided to do something different. But I won't be able to access those, and I still want them anchored to one another. So instead of driving just regular drywall screws or something through there, which holding power is okay, I'm going to use these, I call them barrel bolts or through bolts. They're also called cabinet connectors. I'm going to drill a hole up here behind the face, where the face frame will be, so that they'll be hidden. I'm going to drill one here, and then again 2 in the bottom. And this bolt will then connect through like so in 4 locations on each box. That's going to hold these things together very strongly. I use these very often when I'm doing bookcase built-ins, where I've got to stack multiple bookcases along each other, next to each other, so I can install them. Then once these are connected, then I can use these outside facing pocket holes in which to insert the pocket screws to connect it to the face frame. Then I'll add my panel onto the front side that's exposed to the kitchen, and this cabinet will be done and ready to install, except for the doors, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Before I bolt these cabinets together to drill their holes, I wanted to make sure that the face frame fits evenly with all of the cabinet boxes. So it might be a little bit difficult to see from the camera angle, but I've laid the cabinet boxes on their backs, and then I've applied the face frame over the top of them. The top of the cabinet is actually facing towards you. And I'm going to make sure that they are all aligned such that I can fit this end panel on to the exposed side. So I'll make sure that that fits, align everything up the way I want it. This is a little bit touch and go. You have to take your time and make sure that everything is aligned. And it takes a minute or two just to get everything squared away the way I like it. Alright, then you can take this panel away, and you know that you've got sufficient room, because you don't want the face frame set in a way where the panel's plywood edges are ever exposed towards the front of the cabinet. You never want to see that. So now that these two are aligned, the face frame with the side of the box, I'm going to go ahead and anchor this edge of the face frame using the pocket holes that I drilled on this side. One thing I might note is the face frame is heavy enough with just some simple arm pressure to be able to drive the pocket screw in correctly. You can also add a clamp to that if you want, but usually the boxes are so heavy and the frames are heavy that they don't really need that once you have everything aligned. Now I'm just going to drill the ones in for the top of the face frame. And I'll repeat the procedure at the bottom. got this cabinet box now anchored to the face frame on 3 of its sides. I stopped short of the 4th side because I wanted to explain something. Once I move this cabinet box in to meet this side so that this edge is also under this face frame, I'm going to lose access to these holes on the outside of this box. That's okay because I'm going to have enough anchoring support from just driving the pocket screws through this side of the box. It will hold it to this cabinet very firmly. So I'm not going to have to worry about doors. When I mount the cabinet doors, there's going to be no vibration or no bump on either side because they're very well anchored to one side. I'm also, once I get this moved over and centered, I'll do the bottom, the top, and the left side for me, the right side for you. I'll get those pocket holes into the face frame. Then the only thing that's not going to have pocket holes is just this one side, and that's okay. It's plenty strong. I'm also going to come back once these things are attached, and I'm going to drill holes and drill through and secure them with the cabinet connecting screws that I showed you earlier. So let me get this side attached to the face frame, and I'll move the box, and I'll do the top, the other side, and the bottom, and then we'll start the last box. Alright, I have all 3 cabinet boxes now anchored to the face frame. This thing is going nowhere. It's very heavy, which is by design. I can lift it. I need 2 hands to do so. But you can see that basically everything is attached to the face frame. It's not going anywhere, but I want to add some extra anchoring to get the sides of these cabinet boxes all anchored together. And once that's done, it is absolutely going nowhere. So then we'll be ready to measure for the doors and we can hang them. So what I'm going to do is just drill 4 holes, 2 at the bottom, 2 at the top, as far up as I can get, so that I can insert the cabinet connecting screws. Okay, now with the 4 holes drilled, I can actually take the 2 connecting screws, insert one in the other, and then screw everything together. And they take a little hex head or an Allen head wrench to tighten everything up, but then we're done. Well, here you have it. The second of the 4 cabinets is now complete, at least the carcass. We still have to measure for the doors, and we still have to create some shelves that are going to go in between. We're going to do the shelves in the next video, but I wanted to show you very quickly how we measure for the doors. We could have done this at any time probably along the process, but I usually like to have everything together first because building these cabinet carcasses goes fairly quickly. The way we're going to measure for our doors, notice that we do not have a center stile here for the doors to close against. The doors will simply close against these 3 sides here. Because of that, I want to make sure there's about 1/8 of an inch gap between the 2 doors. So when I measure my doors, I'm going to take the overall width, which is 30 inches of the opening, and the height, which is 35.5. Now, the hinges that I like to use requires that the doors overlap about 1/2 inch on all sides. So instead of being 35.5 on your height here, I'm going to go 1/2 inch higher on the top and 1/2 inch higher on the bottom. So I know that the height of my doors all need to be 36.5. And that's going to be the same whether it's this bay, or the next bay. The height is always the same. So the height opening is 35.5, the doors are 36.5. For this single doored bay here, the width is 14, so my door is just going to be 1 inch bigger to accommodate 1/2 inch on this side and 1/2 inch on this side. So instead of being 14 inches, it's 15 inches wide. Now, it gets a little bit trickier when you do these 2 bays. I know because I built it and measured it about 4 times that the opening width here is about 30 inches. So I would have a 1/2 inch overlap here and a 1/2 inch overlap beyond that other style down here. So if I was ordering one large door, it would be 31 total inches. But I'm going to be ordering 2 doors, and I want 1/8 of an inch gap in between the 2 of them. So there's a little bit of math involved. If I have an opening of 30 inches, one large door would be 31. So if I want 2 doors, I would automatically think, well, 15.5. But then I have to deduct a 1/16 of an inch off of each door to get about 1/8 inch gap to allow for wood expansion of each door. So again, to repeat the math, because this is tricky, it's good for me to repeat it many times to myself. I'm going to have a 30-inch opening, so I'm going to want a 1/2 inch on this side and an extra 1/2 inch on that side, so that makes 31. 31 divided by 2 is going to be 15.5. And then I want to take a 1/16 off of each door. So instead of being 15.5, they're going to be 15 7/16. So what that means is I'm going to be ordering 1 door that is 15 by 36.5. So I'll circle that so I don't mess up my own stuff. So we had 14, extra inch, 35.5, extra inch. That one's pretty simple. So 15 by 36.5 will be this door, and the 1, 2, 3, 4 doors that are going to make up these cabinets are still going to be 36.5 because the height is the same as this door, but each door will be 15 7/16. And that way all the doors will look roughly identical in size in terms of its width. So I'm going to order 4 doors at 15 7/16 by 36.5. And I'll repeat this same exact procedure on the cabinets that go over the stove. I'm going to have, if you remember, 2 single longer doors on either side of the center cabinet, and then the center cabinet is going to have 2 doors too, and I'll measure those and order them. And the next time that we see the video, now that I've showed you how to measure for the doors, I'll actually do the door ordering, and if you want to see that, go ahead and post a comment and I'll show you that. Otherwise, you can pick whatever profile that you want. These are going to actually be raised panel doors, solid raised panel doors that are going to go in these bays. So I can actually show you that catalog number if you want, and I can post the supplier that I use here in the Midwest. So anyway, that's it for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it. I certainly enjoyed showing you how this particular element works. Again, one of our posters had mentioned that one of our viewers rather had mentioned that the cabinets are very heavy. Yes, they are heavy. There always is the option to build 3 separate cabinets using the exact same processes we did here for the longer cabinets, except you won't connect them before you hang them. You'll actually build the face frames and then connect them face frame to face frame after you start hanging them, and you'll do them one at a time. So anyway, with that, I appreciate you watching the DIY Home Build channel, and if you've got any questions or anything you need re-explained, just post a comment or ask a question below, and I'll be happy to answer that for you. Appreciate it. Thank you very much.